Hello, everyone. We're just waiting for people to come in. So we'll wait a minute or two for more people to join. So my name is Natalie Green. Welcome all of you here today to this very interesting event, which brings together applied linguists and discipline specialists or content and language teachers. I am the events officer of the BALEAP EMI SIG, and it's an event which has had a lot of collaboration, not just between the content teachers and the language teachers, but between different organizations that are related to EMI. So that would include the BALEAP EMI SIG, ICLHE, specifically in Italy, and the BAL EMI SIG as well. Okay, so it's a story of happy collaborations. And it's also a story of how one thing can lead to another. Because this is a global webinar. It's our sixth global webinar in the BALEAP EMI SIG, but this particular one it has a history, and it started with a regional webinar based in Italy, which was an online meeting, and that led to a face-to-face conference in Venice. And now we're culminating, but perhaps not finalizing. Perhaps there will be future events. That would be nice in this particular global webinar. Okay. So I'm going to pass on to Michela Gronchi, who will give you details, perhaps about a little bit about the history of this and about the order of the day and the speakers. And thank you very much for joining us. We all look really forward to your contributions. Thank you, Michela.
Thank you, Natalie. My name is Michela Gronchi, and I'm the BALEAP country liaison for Italy. And it's really an honor and a pleasure to be here today. This is our third event, organized by the Italian branch of BALEAP in collaboration with the Italian branch of ICLHE. The Italian activities of the EMI SIG has been really progressing steadily since its inception last year, which was exactly on the 28th of May, 2025. So almost a year ago, we started our activities with a webinar in Italian. And it was a very emotional moment for all of us. And we brought together experts and different stakeholders from the Italian from the Italian scenario of EMI. And then at the end of 2025, we organized an in-person conference in Venice. And I'm really, really grateful for my university, the University of Venice, to have hosted us. And we brought together different disciplinary experts, but we also brought together students involved in EMI, in the EMI provision of the university, which was the highlight of our conference. And progressing from that, it's this webinar, which is kind of, as Natalie has said, is the culmination of the collaboration between BALEAP and ICLHE. And today's webinar is sort of divided into main parts. We have a keynote talk, which Stefania will introduce in a minute. And then we will have a roundtable discussion among disciplinary experts working in the EMI context. So this is all for me. And thank you for coming today and for joining us. I hope you enjoy this webinar, and I hope for more discussion and later on. So thank you very much to all of you, and Stefania, I'll pass it on to you.
Okay, so thank you, Michela, and thank you all for being here today. So my name is Stefania Cicillini from the University of Pavia in Italy. So this webinar has also been organized, as Michela mentioned, by the ICLHE Italian Regional Group that is part of the International Association ICLHE, which is a community of researchers, linguists, and content teachers working in higher education and interest in English medium education and multilingualism. In fact, one of its goals is to bring together content, language teachers, and experts, as the acronym itself of the association, integrating content and language in higher education, and to stimulate collaboration and also collaboration among the members. This is the reason why ICLHE invites content teachers from all disciplines to join the Content Educator SIG, so the Special Interest Group. So if you're interested, you can find more information on the ICLHE website. And just a quick reminder that the next ICLHE symposium will take place in Winter Tertur in Switzerland from the 14th to the 6th October, and that registration is open. But now I'll pass to Beatrice Zuaro, but before that, I'll introduce her very briefly. So the first speaker today is Beatrice Zuaro. She's a postdoc researcher at the Center for Internationalization and Parallel Language Use at the University of Copenhagen, and an honorary research associate at the Open University in the UK. Her research mainly investigates the ways in which language both reflects and reshapes the epistemic, political, and institutional conditions of knowledge production, adopting interdisciplinary approaches that connect applied linguistics with higher education studies, political science, and sociology. She's published in journals such as Applied Linguistics, Higher Education, and English for Specific Purposes. She's also the founder and current convener of the EMI Special Interest Group for the British Association for Applied Linguistics. And so now, Beatrice, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Stefania, for your kind introduction, and also thank you for inviting me to this very interesting webinar. I know that I look forward to hearing more from the other speakers in the rest of today's activities. I'm just going to be sharing my screen, and hopefully you will be able to see my slides. Let's see. We just tested this like 5 minutes ago, but of course, in the moment, there's always something that goes wrong.
No worry, Beatrice, take your time.
This is actually quite unusual. Perhaps you can try and see if you're able to share my slides. You should have a copy of them.
I can do that. I can do that. No worries.
Can you, Michela? Okay. I have them too, if you want, Michela.
Yeah, thank you. This is exactly why I sent over my slides in advance, because you never know what might happen.
Here we are. Okay.
Yeah, that looks right. So I'll just ask you to go to the next slide with the next, and that's probably going to be good enough. No, sorry, if you could get back, to the title slide. So thanks very much again. My presentation is going to be focusing on the positioning disciplinary literacy in EMI. And I am especially, as I said, interested in hearing also from practitioners, because the conversation around EMI is so important also to lecturers themselves, and we don't very often necessarily get to hear from them. So because this is a sort of mixed audience presentation, I thought we could perhaps start by defining the concept of disciplinary literacy itself. Next slide, please. And so I think we all have sort of a intuitive understanding of the fact that literacy skills are not exactly the same. If you could click, Michela. So we have a general understanding of your ability of reading and writing and communicating, which is often referenced as general literacy. But this, of course, is not the same as your specialized literacy skills. We tend to do with specialized content, that with engaging with content that is produced by experts. But I think we also understand that these two things are not one the opposite of the other. This is not a dichotomy. Rather, this is more of a spectrum where one is built upon the other. Next. So in the literature, this is a very old discussion, as a matter of fact. It's not something that we have just understood or learned today. And for that reason, we can actually find different labels attached to these notions of general literacy and specialized literacy. One example is the idea of primary discourse and secondary discourse, or next, the idea of content area and disciplinary literacy. And I think that in applied linguistics and education, most of the definitions that we still work with were sort of defined towards the late 90s and early 2000s. And for that reason, I've collected a few references that might be helpful for anybody who is interested in exploring that conversation in the literature. Next. And you can see them at the bottom. So I have sort of summarized the three main levels at which the discussion of disciplinary literacy operates. And the first definition that we can think of is a specialized approach to reading and writing. And this is a very focused definition, but it's also somewhat narrow. So for that reason, we can also think of disciplinary literacy in a slightly broader way, as a skill to engage not only with the content of the field, but with how reading and writing are used in the field. So it's one thing to be able to access the content knowledge of the field. It's a different thing to be able to understand how the production and communication of that knowledge actually occurs in a given field. And then finally, we can actually broaden the scope even more by thinking of disciplinary literacy as the ability to engage in social, semiotic, and cognitive practices consistent with those of content experts. And this definition in particular, we owe to Fang 2012, and it is the one that I feel the closest to personally. The meaning here is that experts in developing and communicating knowledge create a community of practices that has its own rules and its own traditions. And it's possible to welcome newcomers in these communities, for example, students, by enculturating them in the practices of these communities. So it's no longer exclusively about engaging with text, but it's also about engaging with a community of people that have their own codified practices. Next, please. So if we look at EMI specifically, we have different scholars who have engaged and developed this notion, but arguably the most active one has been John Airy. And he defines disciplinary literacy as the ability to appropriately participate in the communicative practices of a discipline. And if you only look at the top part of this slide right now, you can probably ask yourself, how is this different from any other approach to education? Why is this specific to EMI? And in fact, it isn't. Harry asked that question himself. He says, what specifically does being disciplinary literate entail in an EMI setting? And he came up with 3 dimensions that he thinks are especially important and need to be considered specifically when engaging in EMI. The first one is that is the particular knowledge structure of the given discipline. Different disciplines will build knowledge in different ways, and this has an effect in terms of what language is used to discuss that knowledge and how that conversation develops. Additionally, he also considers the importance of semiotic resource systems other than language in the creation of disciplinary knowledge. Think about disciplines such as mathematics that are largely based on numbers, or disciplines that rely extensively on images or charts. Language is definitely an important tool, but it's not the only semiotic system that can be used in sharing specialized knowledge. And then finally, he also focuses on the sites in which this disciplinary literacy is expected to be relevant, it's expected to be deployed. And he envisions 3 main sites, which are society, the workspace, and academy. And by crossing these different dimensions, he created this disciplinary literacy matrix in 2011. You can see that in the picture. And this is a tool that can be used in many different ways. For example, it might be used by lecturers to reflect on how they use language and other semiotic systems in their teaching and make those practices explicit. It can also be used by course designers, for example, to, again, make the practices in a given disciplinary community explicit and decide which policy is the best for a given degree program. Unfortunately, we do not have time today to go into more detail about the matrix itself, but I think it's very interesting, and you will find a reference at the end of my talk if you want to know more about it. Now, for me specifically, I like to think about building and developing and sharing knowledge in EMI as an even bigger picture. And so I asked a question about the notion of disciplinary literacy to myself, which is, focusing mainly on disciplinary literacy may return only part of the story of EMI knowledge production and exchange. So how do we tell the rest? This is something that is at the very core of my own research, and by studying lecturers' practices in different contexts, including in Italy, I have found evidence that there is much more to what lecturers do in EMI. So the first thing to consider is that disciplinary practices are also shaped by the local culture. We might be tempted to think of a disciplinary practice community as a unity, as a unit that goes beyond national and cultural borders. And that's true to some extent, but there's more complexity to that as well. So, for example, if you think about the way that, a art history program may be taught in an EMI course in Italy, the same art history program being taught in EMI in Japan might probably require different practices of the teachers. So sure, there are some things in common in disciplinary communities, but the local culture has an effect. And additionally, lecturers also perform various kinds of content and delivery adaptations for EMI. And this is work that oftentimes is covered. They don't always receive any type of support or training for this particular kind of adaptations that they operate. But nonetheless, it is work that is being done. And I thought that I would read you a quote that I got from interviewing a lecturer a few years ago that I think is a good example of how the local academic culture and the local culture in general may affect disciplinary conversations in EMI. So this is a quote from a conservation professor. And she says, well, the difference is cultural. It's at the basis, not linguistic, because obviously there are things that we among Italians take for granted, that a monument should be preserved. They're not the same everywhere. Some students tell me, I show them a wooden beam with a ruined part. We can remove that part and create a prosthetic in epoxy metal, put some uranium bars on the side, so that in the end, everything regains density and I can put it back. Rightfully, I don't know. the Indians raise their hand and say, Professor, but wouldn't it be much better to just change it? And I tell them, yes, of course, certainly, from a certain point of view. And that is exactly the problem. But this is very exciting for them, for me, but it is a big difference. An Italian would never say that. It would never cross their mind. So this is, I think, a very good example of, again, I can teach you how to read a conservation book, a text, but there's more to that. The practices that shape the development of the discipline are culturally influenced. And if you participate in that particular academic culture, you may need to be enculturated in that sense. Next slide, please. So I'm very lucky right now to be part of a project that is considering these different dimensions of knowledge development and display in EMI, which is called the MCC project, Multilingual Communicative Competence. And next. We're also on LinkedIn if you're curious about our research and you want to hear us present somewhere else as well. The people that you see on this slide are the core team of this project, and we're currently conducting empirical research at 3 different European universities. Next. Which are the University of Copenhagen, University of Vienna, and Chalmers University of Technology. And what we're doing there is we're observing students' practices and to an extent teachers' practices as well at EMI master's programs in physics to try and see what kind of skills, multilingual skills, are deployed in the process of building knowledge. Next, please. So let me tell you a little bit about the project, but also more generically about the skills that are necessary in EMI. We have already talked about primary discourse, which is your ability, again, to read, write, communicate in general. This would be your general literacy. In addition to that, we have also already discussed secondary discourse, which would be your specialized literacy, your academic or disciplinary literacy. And we have also mentioned how these two things do not exist in separate spaces, right? Next. They, in fact, overlap and build on one another. Now, in addition to that, it's not enough to sound like an expert. You also need to know what you're talking about. And for that reason, it's also important to focus on the content itself. And this is often where actually EMI lecturers feel more comfortable. Oftentimes, they see themselves as primarily content teachers. Now, if you remember what Ari posits about what is important to keep in mind, especially in EMI, one of the things that he mentioned was semiotic modalities. So again, using language is important, but you may also have to master other things like, again, numbers, charts. Artificial intelligence nowadays is a very important topic, and it's a powerful tool that people are trying to integrate meaningfully in education. Now, in addition to that, EMI is also often perceived as an internationalization strategy, and oftentimes EMI classrooms may look a little bit different from the local class, and that is to say that they integrate more multilingual and multicultural participants, and therefore the communication that occurs in those contexts is a little bit different, and the skills that you need to be able to participate meaningfully in that conversation are also a little bit different. So you also need more intercultural communication skills. Next. There you go, cultural competencies. So up until this point, this very much looks like any kind of higher education program. These skills are relevant for any kind of higher education program. But there's one more thing that I think we need to add for EMI specifically. And next. And that would be your primary discourse in English. Of course, this is an additional struggle that is specific to EMI, but we also know that, again, it's not the only thing that matters. It's important that you learn how to communicate effectively in English, but in addition to that, you are still going to need to develop your disciplinary literacy, your content knowledge, your semiotic modalities, and your cultural competencies. So in this project, we're focusing on the intersection of all of these many different dimensions, and we call that intersection multilingual communicative competence. Next, please. There you go, right there in the middle. This is where we theoretically position it. And so I think that if we go to the next slide, if we're talking generically about what is necessary to build knowledge and to share that knowledge in EMI, we can already observe that there has been a shift in EMI scholarship from focusing mainly on language proficiency. Think about, do students have enough starting knowledge of English to be able to participate in EMI? We've now moved a little bit more towards disciplinary literacy and a more complex and nuanced understanding. I think we could argue that times are ready for us to go even further, and that is to say to move to multilingual communicative competence. Next. Which would allow us to encompass all of those different dimensions. And of course, we don't have to think about all of them at the same time every time that we approach EMI, but overall, I think that they return a more complete picture of what goes on in an EMI class. And I think that that's it for me today. So I thank you for listening, and these are my references. I think there might be a slight technical issue going on. Again, this is after all these years using Zoom, we still run into these problems. I don't think it's necessarily a big deal. I will very much take a quiet applause over no applause at all. Perhaps I will take this opportunity to mention once again the EMI BAL SIG. We were not necessarily part in organizing this event, but we were very happy to be able to amplify the event to our membership as well. So if you're interested in our activities, you can also, I'll drop a link in the chat and you will also be able to join. It's completely free to join. You don't have to be a BAL member. So if you want to do that, you will find a link in the chat.
So Beatrice, did you want to take questions or did you want to pass on to next speaker?
Yes, I've now had my audio activated and sorry, I couldn't intervene before. I would just, on behalf of all of the organisers, I would like to thank Beatrice for a very interesting talk. We've actually decided we're going to take questions at the end of the round table. My name's Olivia Mayer. I'm from Università Cattolica with Francesca Costa. We coordinate the Italy regional group of ICLHE, and Stefania works with us in that. And I'd like to welcome our three content experts to be with us and thank them for agreeing to take part today. Beatrice has given us a fascinating talk and conceptualization of multilingual communicative competence, which I think is going to tie in very well with what they have to say. I'd like to welcome Chiara D'Angelo from Università Cattolica. Chiara's an associate professor in the Faculty of Psychology, and her EMI journey began 3 years ago, teaching in English in a bachelor degree in psychology and in a master's program in sports management. We also have with us Vedran Katovic, who's a professor of human anatomy at the University of Zagreb School of Medicine, where he finished his PhD in 2001. His scientific background is in bone biology and immunology, and he has extensive teaching experience at all levels. He's also interested in the pedagogy of the discipline, and he holds scientific writing and publishing courses for postgraduates and for the continuing education of MDs in both the Croatian and English programs in his school. And we also have with us Danica Piper. Danica is a media and communication educator based in United Arab Emirates, where she teaches at Zayed University. She teaches courses on digital storytelling, media criticism, and media production. Her research centers on media framing, digital culture, and communication technologies, and she works with research teams with both peers and students. So first of all, I'd like to invite Chiara to share with us. We've asked the teachers to think about what we've called a critical incident, and we suggest that they focus on their own practice. Vedran said to me he'd prefer to call it a transformative experience because of the meanings that critical incident could have in medicine. So a critical incident we actually defined as a key point, a turning point perhaps for a teacher, but not necessarily negative. And the criticality of the moment is based on the way teachers perceive these moments, as well as on the significance they attribute to them as they look back at them. So not necessarily something negative. Sometimes these moments are called aha moments. And I'll ask Chiara to share hers with us first of all. Thank you.
Thank you, Olivia, and good morning. And thank you again for inviting me to this webinar about EMI and disciplinary experiences. So, as Olivia said, I started engaging myself with the EMI over the last 3 years, and the various training initiatives offered by my university, Università Cattolica, have been, in my opinion, a valuable opportunity for me. I experienced this process as a continued experimentation with my teaching practice approaches, approaching to this experience with openness and constructive reflection. So when I was invited to reflect on a critical incident or a transformative experience in my EMI teaching, I immediately thought of my first sports psychology course for the International Bachelor's Program in Psychology in Italy. Yes, I reflected about that when I designed this course for the first time. My main concern was language. So I invested a great deal of effort in making my English as clear, accurate, and accessible as possible for my students. At the same time, I kept the structure of the core of a course very similar to the one I use in my Italian thought classes. The same topics, same sequence, and the same implicit assumptions about what sport is and what sports psychology deals with. However, very early in the course, I think at the second lesson, something began to feel misaligned. And the class was highly international, of course, because it is an international bachelor, with students coming from different countries, different sporting tradition, and different cultural contexts. And gradually, I realized that the idea of sport I had in mind was not shared at all. So looking back, it was especially striking for me because one of my main research area is dual career in sport. That is the integration between sport and education. And through this work, I'm very familiar with how different national systems organize sport. In some country, sport is strongly embedded in the educational system, while in others it is more clearly separated, relying on clubs like in Italy. And yet, despite this, my awareness, I had not really taken these differences into account in my teaching design. I had not considered how student experiences of sport are shared by this system, nor how deeply this influence what sport means to them in practice. Ironically, at that point, I was so focused on being semantically understandable that I overlooked something that in other teaching contexts I would normally take for granted. And I had not starting from my students' own experience. I had not created enough space to explore what counts as sport in their context, how sport relates to school, performers, or leisure in their lives and in their past experiences, and what social and cultural meanings are attached to these experiences of sport. And this was the real and important turning point by my point of view. I realized that the issue was not primarily linguistic, and the deeper issue was disciplinary. I was teaching a discipline without co-constructing its object with my student. So I reshaped the course, and instead starting from scientific definition and models, I began from my students' experience. And together we built a shared map of what sport meant across their different contexts. And only after that, we moved on discuss how sports psychology can intervene within those different realities. And this also required a shift in my own positioning. I became less concerned with having everything perfectly prepared in English, and more willing to take the risk of not having everything fully under control. And I tried to create a learning experience in which differences in experience in sport, and not only in sport, were placed at the center. In that space, I think English did not disappear as a challenge. For many of us, myself included, it remains a language in which we do not always feel fully at ease, but it stopped being the core issue for me in the course. And the core became the disciplinary content. So what sport is, how it's shaped by different systems and cultures, and how sports psychology can engage meaningfully with these different experiences. So I think that looking back, this experience reshaped how I think about English as a medium of instruction, and it reminded me that teaching through English is not just about translating content into another language, but about questioning what we take for granted in our discipline. So this is my short experience, and so I'm open to your question and what do you think is interesting for you. Thank you, Olivia.
Okay, thank you so much, Chiara. I think you've presented us with a really interesting case about taking for granted that a common understanding is shared among students. And so we'll come back to questions at the end after Vedran and Danica's presentation. So Vedran, can I ask you to continue?
Thank you.
Yes, wonderful. Thank you. First of all, thank you to the organizers, and thank you, Olivia, for inviting me to take part in this very interesting and eye-opening experience. And also thank you to Chiara for creating a wonderful template, this PowerPoint template that I happily hijacked and used to create my own or create a playground for my thoughts. And I would immediately like to say, unlike your transformative experience where English was not the problem, I would like to show a situation where English was the problem, or maybe, and I recognize maybe also with Chiara, the assumptions that we make are the problem. That goes beyond just language. The assumptions that we make create problems. So let me give you a brief overview of my critical incident, or what led me to transform my practices and how I reflected on these issues. To give you some sort of a background, I teach human anatomy in a course that is 24 ECTS points, which basically means that our students study anatomy the whole first year. And we have a Croatian program with 300 students and an English program with between 50 and 100 students. And obviously, I'm fairly fluent in English, so I was chosen to head the program for the English students, unlike the Croatian students. I was not chosen to head that one. I was just chosen to try and adapt the program to fit the needs of our school and the ideas of having a medical program in English. And obviously, I made assumptions that I wasn't aware of before entering this endeavor. And we basically, or I, take the blame or assume responsibility. We basically did what everyone does when they introduce a medical or a program in English. You just apply whatever outcomes were for your native speaking students to the English speaking students, and basically structure the entire course exactly as it's organized for the main student body. And our working hypothesis was fairly simple, as everyone is learning a new language, because our anatomy that we teach is based on Latin, so everything is in Latin terminology. The nomenclature is Latin terminology. All of the diseases eventually, and all of the diagnoses that the doctors in Croatia write are in Latin. The Hippocratic Oath is given in Latin. The academic song of Gaudamus Igitur is also given in Latin, and everyone sings Latin. So we thought, okay, everyone has the same challenge, however long or however many years they had Latin in their high school or previous education, the Latin will still provide the exact difficulty to everyone. And then we assumed, yes, if our students who come to the English program have proven that they can converse in English and have finished appropriate degrees for English as a foreign language at C2, C1 levels, that will make it sure that will assure that they will be able to study in English. Boy, what a surprise. Where you figure out, or when you figure out that our students had a much more difficult task by trying to understand or comprehend these complex terms and complex concepts that we teach in anatomy through a foreign language. So they had not only once removed by using Latin, but they had it twice removed. So that proved to be really, really difficult. And we recognize that however well they could converse your general English, or however we thought they knew English well, whatever knowing our assumption was, it turned out that whatever is taught in language schools or in courses of English is very divorced from what we need them to be able to do. So their competency was very, very different from what we expected. or to use some of the official terms here, the disciplinary literacy in medicine ended up being multi-layered. So especially if you add an additional language such as Latin. So that was a turning point, and that sort of made me reflect on all of these issues. And finally, all of these reflections and discussions with our students and recognizing the misalignment of our assumptions and their assumptions of how they would do this led to us recognizing that you can't prepare for a course in English by studying using your textbooks in your native language. If the EMI is the expected medium, and the added complexity of having Latin just compounded these issues. So this led us to change the idea of expecting our students to be fluent in English to asking if they were competent in communicating these concepts. So that has greatly reduced the stress levels that our students experience, because now they were not necessarily concerned with their eloquency, with their grammar, with the structure of their sentences, as long as they could competently communicate the concepts that we were asking them to communicate to us. So it obviously influenced how we approach our students, how we make assumptions about English, how we make assumptions about our own language, how we make assumptions about medicine, anatomy, terminology, nomenclature. And that has led me on a path of continued reflection, and I think that I have now adopted transformative reflections and a transformative practice, and recognize that that I shouldn't make assumptions, and that we generally shouldn't make assumptions, and that when we do make assumptions, we should test them. And as Olivia wrote recently in one of her publications, we have recognized that English as lingua franca, rather than English as a foreign language, is the glue that binds us, and that gaining the competency of our students in using English competently is the goal. So, and basically, that aligns with my own deep conviction that education is a source of growth rather than a source of regret. So I think that there are so many opportunities that we should use every teaching moment that we get for professional and personal growth, both our own and our students. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Vedran. Another fascinating reflection on an experience in your discipline, and really interesting to hear about the role of Latin in medicine and your shift towards English as a lingua franca, and the concept of being a competent communicator being transformative for you, and how you think about the student experience in EMI. So can I ask now Danica to share her critical incident or transformative experience with us? Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. And thank you, Chiara and Vedran. It was really nice to hear your experience. Now I have a feeling that it's a little bit of repetition, but I will try to focus on media studies just to give a hint where's the problem with teaching in English when English is not your first language, first of all, and also when English is a second language of learning for my students. I teach at Zayed University in Abu Dhabi, where students are mostly local students, Emiratis, who they are bilingual, but the level of English knowledge is different in a group. So sometimes they come from international schools and they have a great and high level of English comprehension, and they can use it very well. Sometimes they come from national schools and very traditional families where Arabic was the dominant language. So they struggle with following the classes, and it's difficult to teach them. When I came here 5 years ago and started teaching the course Introduction to Media Storytelling, I wasn't aware of that differences between the level of knowledge. And I was also unaware of the way how I should present the content. I simply didn't have time to consult any of the colleagues because it was COVID and we were teaching online. So it was a true adventure. And I started with preparing the material in the same way as I was doing before, and with a little bit of visual material and just a little bit of text, so not overcrowded. And in one of the first classes, luckily, I was explaining the concept related to copywriting, like writing influential texts for advertisement purposes mostly. And I had illustrations, like different examples of copywriting in the ads. And I was explaining to them, talking, the definition was even written in a certain way. But when I asked them to give some examples by themselves, they didn't understand. They started explaining I remember there were information about ownership, who has rights, how everything is legally organized, we have to follow. So they were remembering what they learned in the course Media Law and Ethics and bringing to my class. But then I figure out, oh, okay, it's clearly that they don't understand what we are talking about. So they missed the word. And then I was thinking, what should I do? And it was also a Zoom class, which is a nightmare for such situations. So I opened the pad and I started writing, like, so we have two words, copywriting, copyright, and I started explaining what's the difference. Then I quickly opened YouTube, bringing some explanations from there. And it was really difficult because they went into the completely wrong direction. So for maybe 15, 20 minutes, they were listening and following examples without understanding the primary term, which is the topic of the class. And in the end, the whole class shifted from the content to the language clarification. So I used the time of the class just to clarify the vocabulary. And it was really something that was at that time quite challenging and a little bit chaotic because of the whole arrangement. But eventually it helped me because I started organizing my classes in a different format. So I started working more on a vocabulary and just explaining them, like with housekeeping rules for the class. I was just giving them like a small handbook of what we are using and how we understand certain terms. I started including more visual information and also the context, because sometimes without the context itself, students who are coming as bilingual students and also me, which we don't have a common language except English, so there is no help, like in the case of teaching English to the students who speak the same language like you, so you can switch and maybe help with the definition. Here, I think that rebuilding a certain context for the students is important. So I believe that particular moment really changed the way how I approach to teaching. And actually it helped me because I started following the students more and the way how they understand the content. Otherwise, in my mother tongue, I would never follow how much they understood except from the content side. By following how they understand language too, I believe they learn more. And actually, this is the term that I also used in one of the researchers with colleague Sarah Hopkins. She was actually the lead researcher for this autoethnography. So I will just share the link and you can check it out if you want to see the whole approach and how actually we have a chance to learn from this. And that's why I'm happy to have this invitation, because we tend to share experiences that are actually helping us to understand that we have to be aware of the language for sure, but in the same time, we have to be aware of our own possibility to reflect on how we use that language, because if we don't do that, then we will not be better in using English as a medium of instruction. So thank you very much for this chance to share the critical incident, as we call it.
Thank you so much, Danica, and to everyone. I think we can identify a common thread, which is the adoption of critical reflection as part of your teaching practice, how important that is and can lead to transformation. And it's so fascinating to hear these experiences from the three of you. Thank you again for your participation. Can I now invite members of the audience online to share questions? Maybe there are some in the chat.
Yeah.
Michaela's going to handle the questions, I think.
Yeah, thank you very much, Olivia, and thank you, Beatrice, Chiara, Vedran, and Danica for your interesting and fascinating stories and presentations. There are a few questions in the chat, but feel free to raise your hand if you want to ask a specific question. So just while you're thinking about your question, or if you want to, again, write your question in the chat, please feel free to do so. I just want to take a question in the chat, which I think it could be addressed to Beatrice. So this question, I think it's quite interesting, and Mustafa has already perhaps tried to answer it, but perhaps Beatrice, you are the one that this question is addressed to. So Jerome is saying, is it fair to conclude that disciplinary content should include cultural awareness?
I saw that question in the chat. I think it's a really good question. I think that it's important to maybe define the context in which we are asking that question. If we're asking in terms of a multicultural, international higher education degree program, then I think definitely it's something that we need to be aware of. And I think that the real question is here, how many different kinds of cultures do we have to take into account? Again, we have a disciplinary culture, we have a local academic culture, we have a local culture, period, which also defines to an extent the mindset of those who are partaking in the communicative event. So I think that there's a lot of research actually on intercultural communication in higher education environment from intercultural communication scholars. And I think that definitely that's something that we need to keep in mind.
Thank you very much, Beatrice. Thanks. Thanks a lot. There's another, perhaps this is not a question, but this is a comment, something that's, kind of food for thought, I would call it. Somebody in the chat, and apology for mispronouncing your name, Artemi, I hope, I don't know if that's the correct way to pronounce it. Perhaps this is a comment addressed to our disciplinary experts. So I just read it, and perhaps if some of you could comment on this. Training students to express themselves in English on specific disciplinary topics should be recognized as mandatory. Realizing that presenting and discussing these topics will raise challenges, especially in the beginning, but it must be done because the goal of organizing these studies is to prepare international experts in the field. So perhaps Chiara, Vedran, or Danica, if you want to comment on this.
I can say just a few words about that. In my class, for example, I have a international student coming from different countries in Europe who selected the international bachelor, but they don't know where they want to become psychologist, if in Italy or in another countries. But I also have Erasmus students. So they are, for example, in Italy, attending my course only for a semester. So their engage with the language is different. I have, for example, a lot of French and Spanish students. So I think I usually try to let them do some presentation and some experience of English speaking, but I think I can't force them because their trajectories with the English is a medium as a medium of their professional development are different.
Thank you, Chiara.
If I may, I'll add on to Chiara's thoughts, and thank you, Artemi, for posting this. Yes, we again allow me to say that you are making assumptions about the students or future students, our candidates who come to a university. They do not necessarily have the tools or the reflective abilities before they start the school to recognize that their usage of English is not par to what we need them to be able to and how we need them to perform. So they've been exposed to English either as part of their extracurricular activities, some language schools, where they apparently excelled, but they excelled at a level that has nothing to do what we're expecting. I can draw a comparison to my own age. I've been using English since I was 6, but there are areas of English where my English is terrible. I don't know the animal world. I don't know the plant world. So if you transplanted me to a context where I should study about plants, I would have no idea what plants we're talking about. So I would be exposed to, I don't know, probably levels of shame where everyone assumes or expects that as I'm using English fairly well, how can I not know what a poplar is or what oaks are? Or those were not anywhere on the items of my interests. So we make assumptions that yes, oh, these candidates are going to be med students, so they should prepare as future med students, which means they should take this, and that test, prepare Latin. Yeah, they're only going to be year 1 students. They're not going to be international experts day 1 of the course. So I think we need to manage our expectations.
Can I just add something to Vedran's story, because he's right.
Absolutely.
Actually, I think we also have to think about maybe high school education. What do they learn and how they use English, and how structured is that? Like, for example, if they go to some school which is like a vocational school, do they learn about the vocabulary or not? How they use language? To me, it happened. I was at the last year of high school, and it was like a economy school in Serbia, and I got a prize. And the prize won some contest of making some website about European Union, something like that. And the prize was 3 days of like a course for young managers in international school in Bled, in Slovenia. So I went to Slovenia and I started following the course, and it was just, they put a group of 4 students who got the prize into a real management course for MBA managers, and we were following everything, and I figured out I don't understand a thing of what they're saying, and I know English, but the vocabulary, the way how they were expressing all those things, that was like strategic management something. So even coming from the background, and I figure out, oh, but yes, of course, I don't understand, because we learned from Serbian books and everything. So I never had a chance to, and it was like ages ago. So I didn't have a chance to use any web sources from that time. And I was not exposed to that. But it was also a critical incident in not a teaching in English, but learning in English, where I figured out, oh, you have to really, if you want to know, then you have to read from English sources, and that reading part is fundamental. And even now when I'm teaching to students, I always give them something to read which is not directly related to the syllabus. And I'm not taking only that, because if they don't read, they don't have a chance to get to those words. If they just pick up from media and a little bit from school, you don't have a complete person that comes from university. So if I would have to recommend something which will widen up and help us with the learning, it's reading, because everything comes from that. How we will make students to read, that's another topic for another webinar. But thank you, Vedran, because you really put that blink like, oh yeah, that's the problem. What we'll learn and how we are not actually ready to understand many of the fields where we should use English or learn from it.
Thank you very much, Danica and Vedran and Chiara and Beatrice for your contribution and insightful comments. I think we are running a bit over time. So I just wanted to thank everybody, each one of you, for participating and making this webinar possible. I'll pass it on to Natalie for the final greetings. Thank you again, and please follow us on our channels and social media for further webinars, events, conferences.
Oh, yes, thank you, all of you, for a very interesting session, and for the audience participation as well. And yeah, let's just keep the dialogue going. So through our different organizations and with the EMI SIG, if you check out our website, you can join, and then you can email and organize events as well in your own regions. So yeah, thank you very much to all of you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
It was really fun.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Have a nice day.
So much.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
See you. Goodbye.
Hi,